All right, good morning, Doug. We're going to talk about civilizational collapse today, but first I want to tell you a story that happened to me yesterday. I'm in Montana with some friends, and we went to an REI, just a outdoor store to get a couple things. And my friends are very health conscious people, very well informed. They have both the means and interest in understanding the science of things, and they're kind of they prefer not to wear masks. So we go into REI and they stop you right away and like, I'm sorry, you have to put a mask on. And I just grabbed a mask and put it on and just kind of went about what I was doing, because it is a private business, and I kind of so did all of my friends, except for one who said, well, I just wanted to go in and use the restroom real quick, and and then that's it. And they're shopping, I'm just gonna go use the restroom and I'll be out of here. And they said, no, you can't come in the store, you can't come in here unless you have a mask on. And he's like, well, I'll just go to the bathroom outside then. That's what he said. And he goes outside, goes back in the car. And one of the people in one of the employees in the store was seriously afraid of. It was clear there was real fear that they really believe that we are potential pathogens entering their establishment and putting them at great personal risk. You could see the fear in her eyes. As one of my friends, her scarf she had wrapped around just dropped a bit, and they're like, "Put your mask on. Put your mask on. You have to cover your nose completely." Like, you could see real fear, Doug. It's not pretend. It's real. And so then the employees seem to be behaving weird to me, and I like watching people, so I'm observing it, and I'm there with my son. I said, I think they might be calling the police. And so we finished our shopping, get in the car and leave. And as we leave the parking lot, I see 3 police cars pulling in. And I think that's weird. Three together sounds like a call, that's, yeah. And we pull out, and I go to the stoplight, and I'm sitting there, and one of the cars is behind me. And, as soon as I take the turn, they turn on the lights and pull us over. And, they came up to the car, and they didn't even want, they didn't want my identification or anything. I was a driver. They asked, they went for the person who said, who refused to put on a mask, and then went and said, well, I'll just go to the bathroom outside then. They wanted his information, and they were questioning him. Essentially, the employee said that he, went outside and exposed himself and all that. And he didn't do any of that, but he was just making a joke. But I think the bottom line is that we've talked about this idea before, that I think, like during the Cultural Revolution, like during, after the Bolsheviks took over in Russia, you had to be very wary of the people that are around you. There's this ability to turn you in, to see something, say something. And I just feel like this is a sign of what's, by the way, the police was like, they let us go. It was no big deal. They were friendly, but just the fact that all even occurred was pretty shocking to everyone that was with us. And, but not to me, actually, because we've been talking about this and kind of expecting more of this to come.
Well, that is shocking, actually. I understand why you're not shocked, or actually I wouldn't be shocked, because I'm not shocked by anything anymore. But, you should be shocked and disgusted to think that could actually happen in the US. To me, it's a further sign of a general civilizational collapse that we may be experiencing. May not be. I mean, it's hard to tell. Just like when you're in a bubble, it's hard to tell that you're in a bubble because you're inside of it. And when a civilization is collapsing around you, you can't really be sure. Is this just like one of these cyclical downturns that happen all the time, or is it the start of something big? That's always the question. So,
right.
I thought about this.
So how do we know?
This a little. How do we know? Indeed, yeah, that's a good question. And actually, how often do civilizational collapses happen? And that gets back to, well, when did civilizations start? And it's actually quite interesting. Let's figure that a very long-lived man, well, not today, but historically, might live to be like 80 years old. And the start of civilization itself was in southern Mesopotamia, in Sumer, about 3,000, 3,300 BC. Those are the dates that are usually used. So we're talking about 5,000 years for all of civilization, which is to say, if you could put them all together in a room, that would be like 60 or 70 long-lived men could all know each other from, one child might get to know the previous long-lived man. So we're only talking since the start of civilization, from the time before which we were basically grubbing for roots and berries and hunting wild animals. We're talking only what, 70 or 80 men that could have all known each other in sequence. That's nothing. It's just amazing. And here we are living our lives from day to day. Sure, based on that fact, a long view of history, yeah, we could be having a civilizational collapse. So anyway, I thought about this a little bit, and okay, first civilization, to the best of our knowledge, real civilization. I mean, there's indications that people actually constructed monuments and ceremonial centers earlier than that, maybe 7,000 BC. Got to remember, the last ice age ended, let's say 12,000 years ago. And before that, most of the northern hemisphere was covered with a sheet of ice a mile thick. So what could you do then? But okay, now we're talking the Stone Age. And this is really kind of an interesting subject. It's kind of a cosmic subject. If prototypical humans, proto-humans, I should say, started about with Pithecanthropus and Australopithecus, this type of thing, way back. You'd have to turn the Wayback Machine on on high. Okay, we're talking 2.5 million years ago. Forget about that. And they think that anatomically modern humans, us in other words, only came into being roughly 200,000 years ago. Not so long, actually. So we spend basically 200,000 years working with sticks and stones and things like that, hunting animals, grubbing for roots and berries. And then the Sumerians started moving into cities. And they think that one of the major impetuses for that was was understanding how they could use metals. And there are very few metals that occur in native metallic form. Gold is one of them. It's placer mining is all about gold in native metallic form. And it turns out that copper is the other one. And there is metallic iron from meteorites, which can be found occasionally. So it appears that after the end of the Ice Age, and global warming started. Global warming has been going on, incidentally, for about 14,000 years. That's
been pretty good for
fact
people, really.
That most people never think about. Yeah,
it's been.
Global warming is nothing new. Yeah, we've had it for 14,000 years, and then we're not sure exactly how many ice ages there were before that. As we get back into the Pleistocene, to the dawn of mankind a couple of million years ago, but a number of them, where the ice sheets advanced and retreated and so forth. So yeah, we're still in a period of global warming, thank God. Anyway, look, we're talking about civilizational collapse. So, and there's just a lot we don't know. This is all speculative because the evidence of really primitive things doesn't last long. It's basically sticks and stones, which are often hard to even distinguish from natural sticks and stones as opposed to the ones that people played with. Okay, so jumping over that stuff, let's say, and there was a copper age before the Bronze Age because people could use native copper. You could find native copper in a number of places in the world. And that was very helpful. But bronze is generally the combination of copper with tin, generally like a 90-10 ratio. And tin is much harder to come by than copper, much harder. It also occurs in native form. You can placer mine it, actually. I've actually placer mined personally tin in Australia. So it occurs in streams. Anyway, another story, but there's much less tin than there is copper. So, but when you put copper together with tin, you get a much better metal called bronze. You can also use arsenic, which can be found, and you get a different type of bronze, but it's not as good. It's much more brittle. So anyway, so here we are. You've got the Sumerians and Gilgamesh and all this type of thing. And civilization was growing all through the Mediterranean basin. You had the Minoans, which were the oldest European civilization, which led to the Mycenaeans. And of course, you had the Egyptians. The Great Pyramids were all built around the year 2500, 2400 BC, basically using stone tools, some copper tools. Okay, so this was happening all around the Eastern Mediterranean. And then archaeologists have figured about the year 1200, we had a general civilizational collapse. It's called the collapse of the Bronze Age. There was a book that I read some years ago called, what was it called? I think it was called 1177 BC.
Yep.
Which the author put his finger on as the critical year. Anyway, importing tin from Afghanistan got a walk, and this is before the domestication of the camel, frankly. And when you rode a horse, people don't realize when you ride a horse, it's really convenient to have stirrups. But when did people invent stirrups? Here's a question. Fun fact.
I have no idea. No idea.
Well, as best as we can turn, it's about the 5th century AD, post-Roman Empire.
Wow.
People weren't using stirrups before that.
A little uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is. I mean, well, of course, you got to be a lot stronger and a lot more skillful to ride a horse properly without stirrups. But
yeah,
there's all kinds of things that are really recent innovations. And when you look at it, the way I pointed out, with one man knowing another, so that there's a continuity of lifespans. And this is like yesterday with stirrups and horses. Forget about the industrial age. That's like yesterday. So anyway, we're going back to the first civilizational collapse. And it turns out that around the year 1200, which incidentally, it was determined, starting with in the 19th century, Heinrich Schliemann, one of the first kind of modern archaeologists, actually found Troy in near the coast in Turkey. So the fall of Troy actually was a real thing. And there were a fall of lots of other civilizations at about the same time. And it turns out that the great Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations in Greece, they went back to small villages and no writing anymore. I mean, there was writing and there wasn't writing anymore. It just vanished. And all these empires, the Egyptian Empire just about fell at this time, and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Phoenicians, all these people, all these cities, there's evidence of burning and mass destruction over the period of about, they don't know, but 50 to 100 years. And they all go back to square one, but because there were some places that still survived. But it was a major disaster. And people assert, some archaeologists assert, that it was a bigger deal than the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Okay.
Really?
So, yeah, so it's, but we don't think about it because there's just not a lot of writing or anything that goes on around that time. So anyway, getting back to, okay, we got the fall, and there's not too much we can say about it. I mean, was it because of droughts and climate change? Might have been. Agriculture was primitive as it was. I mean, if a volcano erupted in Iceland, a big eruption, the world would cool down, your crops would fail. And when your crops fail, people are starving. So, you get together in a Conan the Barbarian type of mob and, raid that city over there because you heard there were rich people. And so, and there were groups called the Sea Peoples, kind of the Vikings of their days, that are held to be responsible for all kinds of attacks on cities and so forth, but we just don't know. So in any event, but archaeologists have showed that this happened. There was a big dust up around that year, 1200. Okay, so then let's take the Greeks. Huh?
Let me ask you a question first about this. One of the things that I was just knowing that we were going to talk about this, and I don't know really anything about this era, but except for what I briefly read this morning, we want to understand the thing that stood out to me is how complex society was. The society was with all the, there were these different empires or nations or whatever but there seemed to be a lot of complex trade between them and reliance on this complex economy for both food production and also mostly for tin in order to make the bronze. And that's, I guess, that sort of, to me, the thing that I noticed in my little reading this morning was simply that to go from a really complex society, relatively speaking, it's somewhat fragile, and then to go to when that breaks, it could just fall apart super fast. It seems, the more complex it is, the more likely it is to have catastrophic failure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, places like that are good for producing certain types of food, like the Egyptian Valley with the Nile, putting silt around there, is very productive, or the Fertile Crescent. Okay, they could produce a lot more food than they needed, but the Fertile Crescent doesn't have any trees. So if you want to build something, maybe you got a lot of grain, but you don't have any trees. So you got to trade with the people on the coast in Lebanon. A lot of trees there, not so much grain. It's rocky soil. So that happens, and then the Greeks bring in pottery, which you need to store your grain. So it becomes an ecosystem because of different people that are specialized, and their local geography allows them to do stuff. Yeah, and when the train of production breaks down, they all go back to grubbing roots and berries again. It's that simple, basically.
Yeah, that's what worries me, and I don't want to go too far. That's what worries me about now.
The Bronze Age collapse.
It
does. It does, and we don't know why the Bronze Age collapse happened. Maybe it will change. Oh my God, I can imagine the talking heads in ancient Babylonia talking about the dangers of climate change, and then barbarian invasions from the people that are hurt worse than you are, and anyway, we know something about. You can follow one of these civilizations, which is to say, like Greece. So Homer was a real person, or a real group of people, and he wrote his Iliad and Odyssey. He or they, whoever they were, probably wasn't a she or a z or one of those other protons. Not back in those days. So it's guessed that the Iliad and the Odyssey were put together around 750 BC, but that was pre-literate times for Greece. They were just told verbally by trolling troubadours. But eventually civilization came back. And, the glory that was Greece was basically in between, well, the 500s BC to, by the time Greek civilization collapsed with Alexander the Great from Macedonia conquering it. So you had this golden period kind of. But anyway, things were still getting better, okay? After this recovery, after the Dark Ages, the first Dark Ages. And then the Romans rose and other civilizations re-rose around the Mediterranean, sophisticated civilizations, not just the Romans, but the Romans conquered all. But here's where it gets interesting again. Roman civilization collapsed starting, actually, these things start slowly. And this is what's kind of interesting. If the peak of the Roman Empire, which in some way was degraded from what they had in the Republic, but this is a whole different subject. If the peak of the Roman Empire was, let's say, around the year 120, Trajan, Hadrian, those emperors, the emperor was at its peak extent. Everything was pretty mellow. Everything worked. No serious problems from the barbarians. I mean, it was the peak of the Roman civilization, but then it started going downhill in lots of ways that we could talk about. We could have a separate discussion about the collapse of Rome, but it actually started degrading. After it reached the peak with those two emperors, things started getting bad. Taxes went up, incursions from the barbarians who had close enough contact around the edges with the Romans that they could pick up some technology, and their populations grew, and they got better at fighting because they picked up Roman techniques. So actually the Roman Empire was the cause of its own destruction in some ways. From that point of view, the barbarians were really primitive and didn't have any contact with the Romans, it would have been a walkover for the Romans. But anyway, and then of course, starting with Constantine, Christianity became the religion in the Roman Empire. And about 50, 60 years later, I think it was under Theodosius, it became the official and only religion of the Roman Empire. And what Gibbon said in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he said there were two reasons. Barbarian invasions, yeah, that's true. And the rise of Christianity and the corruption that early Christianity brought to Rome. It's really interesting. So since our audience are mostly Christian or Christian background, you can't say anything bad about Christian. Gibbon says it, okay? But here's the thing, why did Rome fall? It was the barbarians became more and more important, and this is one of the most important battles in world history, 378 AD, Adrianople, the Goths. Interesting story about how this happened exactly, and we know a lot about it. And a massive bunch of Goths flowed into the Roman Empire, and they went down through Greece and across the Balkans, and then other barbarian hordes started attacking along the Danube frontier, along the Rhine frontier. And by the year 410, Rome itself had collapsed under a lark. So it happened pretty quickly once it got underway. And then, but outposts of the Roman Empire, lasted for some time after that. But interestingly, when we talk about the collapse of Rome, it had already been collapsing for a couple hundred years. And there are ways you can show that, but it really fell after the barbarians came. And we know that because you can look at the way pottery is made. You went from being very massive amounts of sophisticated glazed pottery to just primitive pots from like thousands of years before, where you could put stuff, but not very well. And the way houses, of which there were many less built, they use thatch as opposed to shingles that were,
Hmm.
And the floors. They could no longer use bricks for the floors. They used dirt and so forth. And literacy, there was no more literature that we can tell, and all kinds of things. So the Roman Empire, why did the Roman Empire fall? I mean, this is I'm going off on tangents trying to set the tone, but it went from, a place where the standard of living was actually not reached again until, and depending what class you were in, of course, if you were on the bottom of the Roman barrel, things were pretty gritty, just as if they were if you were on the bottom of the Western European barrel in the year 1700 or even 1800. It was pretty nasty. But we're talking for the upper classes and people that were going somewhere. I mean, it was probably the year 1800 before people were living as well as they were in Roman times. It's unbelievable, but it's true.
And what's the main reason for that? Why that is? It lost technology? Is it, you have a complex society where with trade and specialization that, half of the things you use, or 80 or 90% of the things you use, you have literally no idea how they come into existence and can't reproduce it if that complexity fails in some way. Is that the main thing, or is it something else?
Well, talking about the collapse of Rome, which we know much more about than the Bronze Age collapse, and of course the collapse of Rome was basically just the Western Empire, because the Eastern Empire was still there, and the Middle East was still there, and Egypt was still there, not going anywhere, but Egypt is a place that has never changed from day one. Okay, there was a German in the last century that put together a list of, I think it was 121 reasons that are given why Rome fell. All kinds of things. I mean, some of them are just goofy, like the rise of homosexuality, and others that kind of interesting, but probably not true, like the use of lead in cooking, which resulted in massive lead poisoning. All kinds of reasons like that. But, the barbarian invasion set it off, because these were more primitive people, and they just overthrew the whole structure of society. Gave different orders, had a different culture, different everything. So that upset things. What else? Well, I would say that it was the Roman state itself that led to the collapse of the empire, because the fact is that the Roman state kept growing and growing and growing under the empire, under the emperors. It's just like the state of California today, different kind of state, has about 1,000 different agencies of different types, about 1,000. Office of this, state committee on that, a business doing this, instead of almost 1,000 of them just for the state of California. I mean,
and these are all rule-making bodies of some kind, I assume.
Yeah, they're not producing anything, but they're basically, the cronies on top are making a huge killing, and the peons below that are employed by these things are not, nearly as productive as they would if they served a useful purpose at all. So it's clear that this happened throughout the Western Empire. The state just grew and grew and grew, and taxes went up, and regulations went up, and we have writings that well, we can send anybody that's interested in this that paper that I wrote on the collapse of Rome.
If you sign up for our email list, you will automatically get it. You'll have access to it. So you can, in the description of this video, you can, there'll be a link, sign up for our email list, and we'll give you a copy of Doug's great essay on the collapse of the Roman Empire.
It's actually a pretty good essay, I've got to say, a lot more cogent than my rambling on a YouTube presentation. But it's never had any commercial success, which is why we're passing it out for free, because people just don't give a damn what happened, in Roman times. I think they might, I think they should give a damn though, because I think we're going through the same type of thing now, quite frankly.
I think we are too, and I think it helps you. The idea, one of the things that I get from between the collapse of the Bronze Age and collapse of the Roman Empire, that period is just this huge gap of lost knowledge, lost technology, and I think both of those civilizations, I mean, what made them stand out in history, I think, is just the complexity and how that dramatically improved the standard of living, and access to food and access to goods and all kinds of things. And if it just winks out of existence, what happens?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you can't get milk and hamburger down at your local Safeway because of the supply chain being broken, where are you going to get your milk and hamburger? How's that going to work? It ain't going to work. So kind of brings us up to the present day, as opposed to getting stuck with Rome. The Dark Ages really were Dark Ages. Where are we today? Well, we have extremely complex trade all over the world. I mean, massive and extremely complex trade. And that could break down if every country puts itself under embargo for political reasons or health reasons. Can't have those infected foreigners coming here.
Right.
So that could break down. And climate might have had part of the collapse, rise and fall of Rome, because there was such a thing as the Roman warm period from roughly 200 BC to 200 AD. And one of the reasons that the barbarians might have invaded is that as things got colder, it got a lot colder up north, and they knew, hey, it's warmer down south. And in addition to that, these Romans have all kinds of really great shit. So let's stay away from them. I mean, that was part of it. So climate change was part of it then, but it wasn't because things were getting warmer. Things were good when it was warmer, and it was warmer than it is today. So that was part of it. That's why I'm totally unconcerned. What I'm concerned about is that since the Earth is just a ball of dirt revolving around a star, and if it wasn't for the sun, this planet would be a couple degrees above absolute zero. It's really the sun, then as now. This is a whole other discussion, which is really interesting, that determines the climate. And it's not, minor amounts of a trace gas going up or down. I mean, it just shocks me, the way scientism has conquered the world. But everybody believes in climate change, and they're generally the same people that are wearing masks, like you saw the other day. The same damn people, same damn people. And probably thought you were a racist for not wearing your mask. They would have fit that in there somehow too.
Somehow it fits, I'm sure.
Somehow it's related. But today, all the corn and wheat in the world are grown basically for export. Are grown in certain places. I mean, the Midwest, basically in the US for corn and wheat and soybeans, and Argentina and Brazil for corn and soybeans, and Russia for wheat. It's funny, the Russians needed to import massive amounts of wheat in the Soviet days. It was a major thing about trading with Russia and shipping our grain to them. And now, the major exporter of wheat in the world is Russia. It's gone from being a massive importer and nothing's changed except for the system. So anyway, is it possible that all these great monocultures, we have mile after mile after mile of corn or wheat or whatever, and it's not just corn, it's the same genetic type of corn with, genetics, the same genomes. I mean, is it possible that there might be some virus or some bacteria or something that would affect these things and wipe them all out. I mean, it's one thing if a disease strikes, Farmer Jones's field. Well, that's a tragedy for Farmer Jones. But if it's hundreds of square miles and that disease, which has been kept out by pesticides and herbicides, but then it finds a chink in the armor, which the offense always does, and there you go. So
yeah, I mean, especially everything's a genetic clone, and so with lack of variation can make it so that maybe one genetic variant might have a immunity to it in some way, that if something finds something, if there is a disease or whatever that can that succeeds in destroying crops, it can just spread like crazy very fast.
Yeah, there's a real danger to gigantic crop monocultures. And of course, another major thing that not only don't people talk about, but the chimpanzees out there are actively promoting is the collapse of Western values. And you got to ask yourself, why did the West arise from nothing to where it is today, where it's because of about a dozen Western values. I think we discussed those in a past.
We did.
Did we? Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did. I'll link to the video about that.
I think we enumerated them. So those are not only being washed away, but they're being actively and purposefully destroyed. And those are the things that made the world as good as it is. So that's being attacked. And then there's a possibility of war. But like Einstein said, one of his best quotes, and he's very quotable, he said, when asked, he said, I don't know what World War III will be fought with, but I know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And my guess is that World War III will have a major biological component, So it's got all kinds of advantages, just lots. It's cheap, it's undetectable, it can attack just people that are part of the enemy tribe who are genetically different from you. And depending on how sophisticated you are, you can tune it. So yeah, we'll have another war, because as the economy collapses, which it's going to, our leaders want to unite the people, which is stupid to start with. But the best way to unite them is to have a foreign enemy, preferably an enemy that doesn't look like you. That's even better. So, and this war is going to be really devastating for destroying stuff. I mean, talk about the tragedy of the Library of Alexandria having been burned. This will be about 1 million times worse, probably. And then another possibility is plague. I guess people are kind of getting grooved into that with this phony COVID hysteria. But maybe we'll have a real plague. That's possible. Could happen. And
one of the things that, go ahead.
No, go ahead. There's all kinds
I was just say one of the things that started our conversation offline about this yesterday was I was just, and this might go to the Western values thing a little bit, but I felt like the over financialization of our world, into these abstract derivative instruments and things like that, and the way that you can succeed in the modern era, by using those tools essentially to create wealth, is really morally corrupting. And I was using this as I own some crypto, and the crypto's gone up so much, and I look at it and I go, I've created more than a dozen businesses, but those were really hard work. I mean, really hard to build something to create value, and yet I see my portfolio expanding so dramatically that you wonder, why would you work now? Why work when you can instead speculate in these things or whatever, and make so much money? And I think it's disconnected us more and more from how you actually create value and accumulate wealth. I mean, it seems so deeply corrupting our society. And most people are already loosely connected with value that's created in the world already, because as employees in large organizations, for instance, you're doing a little part of it. You might not, with maybe even no understanding, even if there's great value created in the end, you don't even understand the value that's created. It's just very loosely connected to it. Your work is, and so I just think that when if stuff starts to go bad and people go, well, I need to do something, they won't even know what to do because of the corrupting influence of the way we've been taught to succeed or trained to succeed by this phony money system and everything we have, is that it involves getting lucky, gambling right, and maybe knowing the right people, it's political or something like that. And just seems like that ends badly. If things go bad, they get worse because we think the solution is actually something that'll make the problem worse.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, back in my early economics books, I used the example of the government putting $1,000 in everybody's bank account on a Sunday night. So everybody wakes up and thinks, hey, I'm rich. I can do all kinds of stuff because I got $1,000 I didn't have before. $1,000 was more money than it is now.
Yeah.
But now, of course, the government's talking about putting everybody on a guaranteed annual income. And, what do we get? We were going to get $2,000. I guess we're going to get $1,400 now as kind of a free gift.
Right.
But no, this is completely insane. I mean, it's why people that win the lottery and live in a trailer park always wind up back in a trailer park. And that's what the government's doing. It's turning the whole country into people with a trailer park kind of mentality by giving them stuff, manna from heaven.
Right. I even think with this idea, in a way, to me, it seems like, and maybe I'm overthinking it, but the delay of the stimulus that's supposed to be coming, this additional $1,400, the delay of it, people that being put out there, but then holding off on doing it, has people looking to, it almost deepens the connection between the way you get money is that they have to grant it to you, because like the anticipation of things has a weird effect on our psychology. In fact, most of our experiences actually have to do with our anticipation of the experience rather than the experience itself. And so knowing that it's coming or believing that it's coming, but it's not coming yet, not once you believe it's coming, you already feel like it's your money. It's your money. So now send me my money. And so how do I get more of my money? They have to give it to me. And it's really disorienting if you're trying to live in a world where you create value. I mean, it's really, really damaging, I think.
Yeah, it is so terribly corrupting. And it's not just in the US and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, it's in Europe too. And oddly, because they don't give you free money if you live in the Orient. If you live in any place in East Asia, you don't get free money. They don't do it. They don't have welfare. And they don't have welfare in China. It doesn't exist. So it's, and another part of this thing is that white people have been taught to hate themselves. It's evil to be white, and this stuff is all over the place now. And young white people have been indoctrinated to believe it, and it's reinforcing when they tell each other these things. So part of the collapse of civilization, and maybe, this goes into the realm of science fiction, and there are a number of science fiction books that have kind of predicted, well, a good science fiction author looks at all possibilities. Like, I think it was Ira Levin's book. He wrote a book called This Perfect Day. It was an excellent book about a totally controlled society, but different from 1984, different from Brave New World. So this gets into science fiction. I mean, is it possible that since Bill Gates believes that the ideal number of people on this planet, in his expert opinion, I mean, what is he? He's just a nerd that got lucky, got a hold of a program that somebody else developed, but he's got a good business brain and he's ruthless. And now that he's a multi-billionaire, he's got the authority to talk about everything. I mean, is it possible? Is it possible in his wisdom, he thinks that maybe the Earth should have no more than, say, 500 million people? Well chosen, of course. And could it be that a virus is being developed to wipe out almost everybody? I mean, anything could happen. I mean, you look at all these great dictators in the past that have wiped out tens of millions of people using simple, brutal methods like, guns and
Starvation.
swords. Yeah, starvation. That works. I mean, maybe a virus is the best way to reduce the world's population so we don't have so much global warming.
Mm. Yeah, well, and it's also a lot more convenient to get around with a lot less people. Could just be convenience. Who knows?
Yeah. So I think a case can be made that we're quite possibly involved in something similar, but for different reasons, but some of the same reasons as happened during the Bronze Age collapse, and then during the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. And oddly, this is one of these strange coincidences that probably mean nothing. The Roman Empire fell roughly 1600 years ago, more or less, within a range of 100 years either way. And oddly, the Bronze Age collapse took place 1600 years before that. That's probably just complete coincidence. But although oddly enough, the Bronze Age collapse itself took place about 1600 years after the start of civilization itself, when people first started moving into cities in Mesopotamia. It's like the trifecta, 3 out of 3, but probably doesn't mean anything. And I say that as somebody that thinks that Strauss and Howe's theory of the fourth turning, I think it makes sense. I think these guys are right for a lot of reasons, but something happening on a grand history scale, I don't know. It's just an interesting coincidence. But then again, they say that there are no coincidences, so you got me.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do think the thing that the complex nature of those societies all on a relative basis, is what I think makes our current time stand out. It just seems so fragile. Look at what happened in Texas, where, I'm here with some people that are from Texas, and of course they prepared and they had backup systems and they were fine. But a lot of people suffered, a lot of people died, and because our super sophisticated system couldn't, of course, keep the electricity on, but also in addition to that, we couldn't get food to grocery stores. We couldn't, emergency services couldn't, take care of people who had who needed health aid or whatever. Like it all went dark, and you had serious problems in the blink of an eye from just a random storm system. So if that can take that down a very sophisticated place that has rich resources like that, it's I think it's a preview perhaps of what's possible.
Yeah, and frankly, I think there's a lot more reason to be afraid of quick global cooling than there is global warming. It's the cooling that's going to kill the crops and freeze people to death and all the rest of this type of thing.
Right. There's I don't know, and I don't want to go too far into it because I don't know that much about it, but the grand solar minimum is what it's called, this sun cycle that sort of is associated with significant cooling periods, and we're entering that. It's a big cycle, and if you want to read about something frightening, Google that, read more about that. It's crazy.
But you're not going to read about that in the New York Times because that is completely at odds with the global warming scenario.
Yeah. I think people should start paying more attention to their own experience in the world and try and derive some knowledge from that rather than handed down wisdom that we get from the powers that be.
That actually makes sense. It's like what gaslighting is all about. Who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes?
Exactly.
And you got to say that whenever you're looking at the idiots on CNN blathering on about things.
Yeah, well, so just a couple of things that again strike me as things. Someone was saying yesterday that in a comment that we're overly focused on negative stuff, or that we were like almost getting to a point of learned helplessness, like we can't do anything about these problems. And actually think if you look at history, there are clues about what one could do. Not that say you can stop like what happened in Texas. You couldn't. But there are people who fared far better in that situation than others. And what it was is, they realized their dependence on complex systems, and they tried to hedge that dependence on complex systems. These people have skills that are useful in the real world, not just skills that are part of a long assembly line of activities that produce end value. And they fared quite well. And I think that the people who had the most useful skills as these societies collapsed could still have thrived, although totally differently, obviously completely different environment, but that doesn't mean that their livelihoods were necessarily utterly destroyed in the process. I'm sure there were Romans after the barbarians came in that were able to build them some sort of life for themselves that was not the same, but still, gratifying in many ways, I would imagine.
Yeah, as long as you could produce some good or service that the new rulers valued enough, you could move up the pecking order.
Or relocate, right? Or relocate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And maybe, it's just like the fringes of the empire were some of the last places to fall, because it wasn't convenient for the barbarians to venture that far out towards the fringe.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, I think there are things that you can do, but I think looking at history and understanding what happened and being able to then best identify the actual problems that we're facing today, and the actual problems we're facing today, in my opinion, are not the problems that we're encouraged to tackle. It seems like we're encouraged to tackle problems that are just ultimately designed, well, maybe not designed, but they definitely do divide people. They divide people. So whether it be the racial issues or strife that's come up, it seems like it's designed to divide. I mean, certainly the hysteria part of COVID seems like it's definitely designed to divide. I mean, people are dangerous to you. Don't come close to me. We can't have any contact with each other. It's like it's designed to divide us. And so I don't think those are the major issues that we're actually facing. We have this huge economic problem that's coming that doesn't get a lot of play because we're overly focused on, almost the theater of these other problems. So there are things you can do if you focus on the problem.
Yep, you're absolutely right, because I've mentioned to you off camera many times the fact that on Fridays, I generally get together with this group of about 20 guys, and they never talk about, they're smart and they're rich, and they never talk about the economy or the problems thereof. They're just talking about politics and what's in the news. And when I bring up stuff about the economy, looking for a discussion or input from some of these other guys, there's no input. Like they don't know or they don't care. I'm not even sure which it is. So yeah,
I think these topics, if you're going to be very conspiratorial minded, they are these things, these issues that have come up in the last year, from COVID to Black Lives Matter, and virtually everything that's come up. It seems like it's designed to get you entrapped into a mental quagmire of defending your position. Gaslighting. It really is gaslighting. It's getting you to feel as though you need to defend a position, and the whole point is not whether or not your position is right. It's to distract you with defending that position. If someone calls me a racist,
and they're making it so much harder to do that, because they're making it so much harder to talk to other people that might share the same views, and so you feel all alone.
Exactly. And so that one, last thing I'll just say is that we set up this Meetups group that helps us, that will enable viewers of this channel to connect in the real world. I'll be going to several events over the course of the next few months. You can see I'm in my RV now. I have this RV for the purpose of that, really being able to get around more. Doug, you'll at least be at one of them. Freedom Fest is the current plan. And so have the opportunity to meet some of our viewers, but join meetups, find other people who think the way you think, start focusing on the problems, and then, bringing real solutions into your personal life. Don't worry about the global solutions, worry about local solutions, I think. And there are plenty of them. So I think we'll leave it at that.
Yep. All right.
All right.
Well, see you tomorrow, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Really appreciate it.
All right.